Right now, it's somewhere, someplace, computers are whirring with speed and precision. John Sculley's vision and leadership are making a difference in how we live. The Apple Computer Chief Executive has won praise and respect for economic foresight and business innovation. He joins us now to talk about the future. Welcome. Here is a fabulous story, and I was telling somebody this evening, knowing you were coming here. Steve Jobs comes to you. You're a chief executive, you're number 2, president of Pepsi, and being groomed by Kendall to be the top guy. And he says to you, what?
Well, this romance went on for about 4 months, Charlie, but eventually I said, Steve, I really think that you ought to go find somebody else. And we were right here in Manhattan, and he looked down at his tennis shoes and he looked up at me and he said, do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world? And I knew I was hooked.
He had you. Have you changed the world? Do you tell me how you see the world changing because of not only Apple, but IBM and Microsoft and the whole new revolution that's taking place there? Define that revolution for me, this technological telecommunications, the merging of digital and all this other stuff.
Well, I don't think I'm personally changing the world necessarily, but I do think that there are some very important events that are going on that are helping shape an entirely different world than we've seen in the past. The personal computer industry is only 16 years old, and yet it's an $80 billion global industry, and this was created by 2 important technological events. One was the invention of the integrated circuit, which actually came out of all of the work to put a man on the moon back in the 1960s. And the other was the invention of what's called shrink-wrap software applications, so that you could do spreadsheets and word processors and publishing on a personal computer. And that's continued to improve year after year to create this $80 billion industry. But in the 1990s, Charlie, we're going to see something that's far more exciting than what's happened in the last 16 years. And that's because there's some trends that are already in motion that are going to lead to the convergence of computers, telecommunications, and content. By content, I mean everything from text or graphics to video, films. All of this is going to be done in digital format. And this is going to be a digital revolution. And the way to think of it is that computers are going to get smaller and smaller. And they are already based on digital technology. Consumer electronics.
Just for the rest of us, what is digital technology?
Digital technology is the technology which says that you can encode technology into really a binary system of ones and zeros. And it's this encoding which gives instructions to a computer to do all of the miraculous things that it does. In the technology that we use today, for instance, with television, this is not digital technology. This is called analog technology. Right. And this takes a continuous wave and it modulates it. In other words, what it is doing is it's basically taking the information that it sees and it's representing it in a way that is not very compressed. It takes up a lot of space over the airwaves. And when digital technology replaces it, which it will in the 1990s, it will mean that we'll have a vast expansion in terms of the capacity of the airwaves. So instead of having maybe 13 or 20 channels as we have today in television, you can theoretically have over 1,000 channels because of the compression that's possible with digital technology.
What's stunning to me, we just did a little seminar in Washington, I learned a little bit about this, is even all of us, high-definition television was going off in one direction. Japanese were there, Europe was going off in another direction, and then the United States, not knowing quite what came up with the digital, or at least seemed to have pioneered it, and now everybody realizes that digital is the way to go for high-definition television.
Well, that's absolutely right, and it's going to have 2 significant consequences. First of all, almost anything you can think of by the turn of this century, that's only roughly 7 years away, is going to be in digital format. And that means that once you take text or take a film or a video and you put it into digital format, this means it can be retrieved and stored very easily. It also means that it can be broadcasted over digital networks very inexpensively. So high definition television, which today is very expensive, is going to be relatively inexpensive and very accessible to us by the turn of the century.
The papers have been full of stories about you coming down from Apple headquarters to Los Angeles to talk to people like Mike Ovitz and Mike Eisner, guys who have command of software, material to put on a television, on cable, and elsewhere. What's the common interest you have with people who have software? Why is the head of Apple Computer interested in that?
Because we know we are on an inevitable convergence of what they do in the entertainment industry and what we do in the computing industry. We in the computing industry need a different kind of software to make our devices run, and that's the software that gives the computer the instructions to be able to perform. But it also is the same kind of technology that you need for digital television. And the people in the entertainment industry know that there is a brand new media that's going to appear in this decade, in the 1990s, which will be even more important than anything we saw with VCRs, or any more important than any technology that really has occurred up until now, like CD audio. And this is going to open up entirely new opportunities for the way films are created. We'll have interactive movies, for example, in
where
the
you
future.
can talk back to the movie, you want to stop and rerun it if you want to change the way that...
You know, you say, gee, I'm not so interested in learning more about this, tell me more about that. And so the ability to navigate yourself, I mean, think of the presentation of a movie or reading a book today as a relatively passive experience. I mean, you're watching what the author wants you to see. In the future, think of it more like a game. When you play a video game, you're taking your chances against the machine in terms of what's going to happen. You don't always know what's going to happen because you have to make choices. Now, imagine something that's somewhere in between, something that has the experience of a game and it's interactive, but at the same time it has the quality in terms of high resolution that high definition television promises. And that's what excites the people in the entertainment
You also
industry.
have figured out, I guess, and know that the most retentive learning comes when there's a hands-on application, when you're doing something. Is that right?
Absolutely true. This was actually learned back in the 1960s. And some educational psychologists, in fact, Jerome Bruner here in New York was one of the leaders in this, discovered that people recall about 10% of what they hear, which means that probably by tomorrow morning, 90% of what we've said is going to be forgotten by the audience.
Sadly. Go ahead.
But people also remember maybe 30% of what they read. But if they actually do something, if they're interactive with a device like a computer, they can retain up to 85 to 90% of what they're doing. And that's why you can have a huge impact in terms of reforming America's education system and getting kids interested, because you can add a more interesting entertainment environment.
I want to talk about you and your experience in Japan and how you've been able to penetrate that market when other companies haven't. I want to talk about your relationship with IBM. A lot of people say that's fire and ice and hot and cold, and they can't imagine the two of you in a joint venture. We'll talk about that. But let me first set up, this is a dramatization. This whole conversation with John Sculley is about the future and where it's going, innovation, telecommunications. Here is a dramatization of the future of computer technology and computing technology and telecommunications.
After my talk, you would come up on the big screen, discuss your article, and then answer some questions from the class.
And bail you out again? Well, I think I could squeeze that in. You know, I have a simulation that shows the spread of the Sahara over the last 20 years. Here, let me show you.
Nice. Very nice. I've got some maps of the Amazon area during the same time. Let's put these together.
Great. I'd like to have a copy of that for myself.
What are we seeing there?
Well, Charlie, back in 1987, which is a little less than 6 years ago, I wrote a book and I described a vision of what I thought a personal computer would look like in the early 21st century, and I called it the Knowledge Navigator. And then following that, we decided to make a video dramatization of what that might look like, since we couldn't actually build one at the time. And when we showed it to people in the computer industry, they said, hey, that's a lot of marketing hype. Why are you showing people a fantasy like that? Well, it's a little more than 5 years later, and most of those concepts are already being implemented in products today.
How fast is the technological change? In other words, I don't know if we can quantify it for us. In a sense, is it, I mean, are you all surprised, even those of you, and you're in charge of technological innovation at your company, are all of you surprised at how fast this world is changing?
We are absolutely astounded. I mean, we knew that technology was going to continue to evolve at probably at least the pace it has over the last 10 or 15 years. But what has occurred has taken place much faster than I think we even thought of a few years ago.
Are there any dilemmas for all of us to confront, those people who worry about ethics and those people who worry about the kind of society we may be creating? one simple point, you know, that if we create too much of this sort of living at home and working at home and computing, we are losing a sense of interaction with the rest of the population and neighborhoods, all of that thing that might isolate us, and that's not an interesting or healthy sociological development.
Well, I think that that is not the biggest risk that we have. It's just like people don't become obsessed with telephones, and that we have them and we use them, but we take them for granted, and that's really where this kind of technology is going. What makes this vision of the personal computer different than what we know today, it's really built around the idea of communications more than computing. Yeah. And it's built around the idea of a conversation metaphor. So there you saw really a video telephone with multimedia simulations, which the computer can now do, and with speech recognition technology, which is already being demonstrated. So think of this as really an extension of the telephone or a reinvention of television as opposed to just another computer. And if you look at it that way, it should become as part of our life, just as these other devices have become a part of our lives. It doesn't have to totally consume our lives. The thing that worries me, quite frankly, Charlie, more than what you proposed, is that we could end up having a division in our society where you have, you know, those people who have the access to this technology and those people who can't afford it, who don't have the access to the technology, and we end up starting to create, you know, a real
almost on a class in terms of information and knowledge
division.
And how do we avoid that?
One of the ways I think we can avoid it, and this is one of the things that Bill Clinton asked a few of us in the high-tech world to help him think through, and that was to develop a technology policy that would start to look at the kind of infrastructure that we want in a new economy, which is really a global economy, where people have to be able to think and make judgment skills, and where you've got to have everybody capable of doing that, not just a managerial elite. And one of the ideas that has come out of this is to have a high-speed data highway, much as we had the interstate highway system 30 years ago, which really formed the basis for commerce during the industrial age. Well, we're now in a knowledge-based economy, and now the really valuable resource that we have to move around is ideas and information. And so having a high-speed data highway could give us some dramatic alternatives. Let's take inner-city schools where kids don't have access to the best libraries. You can have access to some of the best libraries in the world for kids. You can make the experience of learning customized to whatever their particular interests are so that you get their share of mind.
And who provides the computers, and where does the resources to buy them come from?
I think the private sector is fully capable of funding these kinds of efforts. What's needed is a clear vision, starting with the president, much the way President Kennedy did 30 years ago, to say, let's put a man on the moon.
I'm glad you brought up President-elect Clinton, because there's much talk that you may go to Washington, be Secretary of Commerce or some other job. Are you going to do that?
No.
You will not?
No, I think that I can be of a lot more value to Bill Clinton and hopefully to the nation by focusing on things that I'm already involved with. I'm chairman of the National Center for Education and the Economy, which Hillary Clinton is also on the board of, and that's focused on education reform. I'm chairman of the Computer Systems Project, which is the 12 CEOs of the computer industry, and we're looking at things like this information highway. So there are a lot of things that I think I can do from the private sector that in many ways might be more impactful than I could if I went down to Washington. Quite frankly, Charlie, I don't know much about how you run government.
Yeah. Quickly to IBM and the joint venture. A lot of people say this is mind-boggling because, first of all, computer secrets are so protected. And secondly, you two seem to be culture and counterculture. It seems to be two very separate, a square peg and a round hole, that two companies that would never fit together. I mean, how did it happen, and what do you expect to accomplish from this?
Well, bottom line, it's 18 months later since we announced the alliance.
Right.
It's working beautifully.
And now, the goal is what?
The goal is to create a set of foundation technologies that will take us well beyond anything that we know in computers and communications up until now. And the reason why IBM and Apple turned out to be very good partners is that we are extremely good at software technologies that focus around what human beings want to do, which is really user-centered, making it easy to do. IBM is very good at all the stuff in the back room, which is how do you make all these complex networks fit together, how do you connect it up to the largest, most powerful computers. And so what IBM and Apple have joined together in is to say the world is going to be so incredibly complex when it goes digital, when we have digital television, when we have digital telephones, that it's impossible for any company to do it all by themselves. So let's agree on the things that we can work on together, and then we'll go off and work in areas where we can differentiate our products and compete.
Is Apple, you've had a penetration into the Japanese market, correct? And people say you've been able to do that because you were smarter and wiser about understanding that culture. What is it you understood that allowed you to have access to that market?
Well, we were smarter and wiser because we were there long enough to make a lot of mistakes and learn from them. And the first efforts that Apple had in Japan were actually a pretty dismal failure.
Because you didn't understand the market, didn't understand their needs?
Because we went in and we tried to run it as an extension of what we were doing in the United States, and it was just plain wrong. And what we ended up doing 4 years ago was we said, let's start with a clean sheet of paper, let's put in a Japanese management team, let's build our products to the specifications of what the Japanese customer wants. It's now 4 years later, we have a business over $500 million in revenue. We're now the second highest brand awareness in Japan.
What's first?
NEC. We passed IBM for personal computers in Japan. And our business is absolutely booming at a time when the Japanese economy is in some distress. So we have a tremendous success story in Japan.
Could the automobile companies have done the same thing if they had been as smart and savvy about the market or learned their mistakes? I mean, we only now hear about putting the steering wheel on the right-hand side, and all those things that seem obvious in terms of understanding your market. I don't want to simplify it, and I don't want to pretend any knowledge about this, but is it as simple as those markets being closed to the manufacturers, or is it more a case of them not being very savvy about understanding that market?
I think you can make a very good case that they could have done a lot better if they ever tried. Seriously, I've been going to Japan on a regular basis for many, many years. I must make maybe 8 or 10 trips to Japan a year. I see lots of executives from different industries, from the United States, from Europe there. I can't remember ever bumping into an American automobile executive when I was in Japan. The only time I think American auto executives ever go to Japan is when they want to go and buy something. Why not go and sell something? And I think the way you sell something is you go in and you find out what the market wants and you start to build a product which will appeal to that particular customer. I don't think the American automobile industry did that, and I think that maybe there's some barriers there. Maybe they wouldn't have been as successful as they might have liked to have been, but I think they could have been a lot more successful than they are today.
A couple of quick things. One, do you fear anything about the Japanese challenge to the United States, notwithstanding the present economic difficulties they're having there, in terms of what they've done with the semiconductor and in terms of their capacity to take American innovation and make it their own, as they did with, say, the classic example is the VCR?
Well, I think the big challenge we have is that the way we measure success in this country in the business world, which is how the stockholders vote, is on quarterly earnings. Yeah. And the Japanese, as the Europeans do, have patient capital. They're willing to wait a good number of years, and they're more interested in market share. They're more interested in creating really core competencies. And they're willing to take
losses and reduce their margins in order to maintain market share.
Yes, and if we try to do that in the U.S., you'll just watch our share plummet, and you'll see management's turnover quickly.
So do we have to change that in order for America to gain its edge in terms of innovation, more respect for R&D, and less attention to the way the stock market and Wall Street values companies?
Well, the simple answer is we eventually have to figure out how to be more patient with our investments, but there's no easy way to get there.
Tell me what this thing is. This is a PowerBook Duo.
Yeah, this is, let's see if we can turn it on.
All right, go ahead. Help. That camera can pick you up right there. I got less than a minute, but tell me what this is.
This is a PowerBook computer. This is as powerful as the most powerful computer we made just a year ago. But the difference is...
It weighs about what?
This weighs 4 pounds.
Wow.
And it has 120 megabytes of storage, which is a lot of storage in it. Right. It has built-in communications, and it's as much a communications device as it is a computer.
Meaning what?
Well, for example, if I wanted to write a letter to you, just thank you for being on your show, I could write it on my PowerBook and just fax it to you, and if you have a fax machine, it would come out on your fax machine.
Unbelievable. Now, is this available for home consumption, or is this for I mean, who's the market for this?
Well, the market is
I
really
don't want to break it, so
business
open it up
and
for me while we
sure,
talk.
its market is business education, but it's actually getting even smaller than that because this is one we're working on that will come out in 1993.
And what's this
which
called?
is called Newton.
Yeah.
And this one
this has had some trouble. It hasn't come on. They were accused you out of time, but of promoting this before it actually was ready to go.
Untrue.
Okay.
It's actually on schedule. It'll be an exciting product coming out in 1993, and it uses handwriting recognition, built-in communications, and it just shows you how the technology is getting more and more miniaturized.
In retail?
This is somewhere around anywhere from $2,200 up to about $2,600, depending on how it's configured.
Yeah. Great. And this is the Newton will be available.
This will be under $1,000.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Charlie, good
Enjoyed
to be
having
with you.
John Sculley, head of Apple Computer. We'll talk with him at another time about the extraordinary world of the future in technology. We thank you for joining us. On tomorrow's broadcast, New York Times reporter Rosemary Bray's personal journey through the welfare maze and photographer Roger Restmeyer's guided tour of our world and our solar system. All of that plus more tomorrow night. See you then.